Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome to the Stoa. This is another edition of What Gets Left Behind in the Hallway of Hallways with Nora Bateson. This is a Sensemaker in Residence series for the month of November. I imagine most of us know the drill, but if you have any questions, anytime Nora is talking, just throw them in the chat. When we have the Q&A portion, I will call on you. You unmute yourself, ask your question. I'll read it on your behalf if you don't want to be on YouTube. So that being said, I will hand it over to Nora now.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. It's Monday again, and this is our second session of the Hallway of Hallways. And Peter, just to check, can I share screen? Is it possible for me to do some screen sharing today? Okay. So last time we met, hopefully a lot of you are returning. I'm hoping, because this is kind of a cumulative thing. But the last time we met, we were playing with levels of abstraction. And working with, I think, some of the more critical questions around why it is that so much of the very practical applications to work to solutions of problems that we're facing right now are somehow coming up short. That's one way to put it. Another way to put it is that there has been there's been a push to make a culture shift before policy shift, and that push has largely been on behalf through technology, things like Cambridge Analytica, aggregate IQ, a lot of different kind of ways of working, recognizing that if you try to make change at the level of structure, but the level of actual somatic habit, living, identity, thought processes, ideologies, epistemologies, frames of seeing and perceiving, sense making. If the sense making doesn't change, the structures won't hold the change. There will be pushback. So this is something that I'm kind of opening in this space because I think it's something worth opening and playing with. It's on the one hand pretty serious stuff. The things we were playing with last week were actually pretty high level theory, but we were doing it through music, and hopefully it didn't hurt too badly. And Peter, I'm just letting all these people in because I'm getting the admit signals. I hope that's okay. All right. So we could do a lot of talking about systemic change, about complexity, about interdependency, but I just wanted to kind of take another path with this Hallway of Hallways project, and kind of address some of the stuff that's not in the mainstream right now. It's a funny kind of mainstream, by the way, when you're talking to the Stoa. So this is the mainstream of the Stoa audience I'm talking about. Not, maybe not the mainstream, but right. So we started off with this poem, and I think I want to start with it again. So this is a piece that I wrote that Peter and I decided would be a good kind of backbone for these 4 sessions. And I'm just going to open it up here. And I know the text is insanely small. It's on my Medium site, so if you would like to get it for yourself, but I just wanted to start with this again this time. And this is the hallway of hallways. Trying to fix the wrong context of broken is a hallway of hallways. The suffering is the consequence, not the problem. Don't solve it. It's not that the schools are not good enough. It's that the next generation is being squeezed into the past. It's not that poverty is devastating. It's that the economy devastates. It's not that our bodies have been violated. It's that predators are celebrated. It's not that tech is evil. It's that it's unable to feel. It's not that the doctor is wrong. It's that there's the poison in the food, water, air, and stress are beyond the reach of medication. It's not that politicians don't make change. It's that they're bound to keep things as they are. It's not that the journalism is crap. It's that it is selling one side of a 1,000-sided story. It's not that the climate has problems. It's that identity is mixed up in material wealth. It's not that there are dangers out there. It's that people need each other and are taught to hold back. No committee or action team can actually reach the conditions that produce the issues, but they can produce metrics on the solving of the consequences. It's not that there's no wish to meet the deeper needs. It's that the healing cannot be divided or measured by department. The confusion is compounding. Going down a path that starts with an inadequate task is the beginning of an assembly line of industrial-sized, overlapping, systemic problems. So that was what got us started here, and what we wanted to deal with. And part of where I wanted to start is that I have felt for some time a kind of frustration that so many of the wonderful and really fantastic people that I've had the opportunity to work with around the world don't really have a basic understanding of some of these more inconvenient pieces of not new systemic theory. And one of those pieces is known as Bertrand Russell's logical typing. Okay, lucky for you, we did that last week, but nobody gets logical typing in one bite. Nobody gets it on the first date. So we're not exactly done yet. The thing with logical typing is, and that entire poem that I just read for you is basically about logical typing. Okay, so trying to address a situation at a level of abstraction that it isn't in. Okay, so we talked about Alfred Korzybski, and Korzybski, if you haven't studied any Korzybski, I highly recommend Korzybski. Korzybski talked about logical typing in a way that was more understandable, because when I say the word logical typing, you may be thinking math, right? And it is math. It's coming from math. Basically, this is set theory, right? So you remember in set theory, back in the day, you'd have a set, okay? And in the set is furniture. And a member of that set could be chairs, right? But chairs are not the whole set of furniture, right? That's perfectly obvious, right? So that's essentially what we're working with. You can then have a set of chairs, and stools could be a member of that set. All right. So Korzybski took that piece and worked with it around the idea that the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. And that's what we were playing with last week. We were listening to some music, and we listened to the music, and then we looked at the score of the music. And we were wondering and playing with what kind of sense maker processing, in what way we were sensing and making sense of the music, and in what way we could make sense of the score, whether or not you read music. It's a very different thing, right? The map could be seen as the score, and the music could be seen as the territory. So that's what we were playing with, right? And when you go to a restaurant, you understand that the menu is not the food, right? You get that. They give you the menu. You don't eat the menu. It's pretty obvious. So the frustration here and the possibility that I was hoping to bring into the Stoa is just to bring this up and begin to play with it. Because when you start to look at many of the project descriptions, the committee definitions, the categories that need to be measured, the idea of goal and solution around most of the projects that all of us are involved in, you will see that there is an error in this abstraction thing. Okay, commonly, if you're in the know, we call that an error of logical typing. And it has to do with trying to change things at the wrong level, right? So you say to your kid, I want you to get better grades. Okay. What you probably mean is, I hope that you're learning a lot in school. But that's not the same thing, right? The grades don't necessarily measure how much your child is learning in school. A good deal of what your child is learning in school is actually how to be in this culture, how to be in a classroom, how to be who they are becoming in relationship to the other students, in relationship to authority, in relationship to language, in relationship to their way they dress, the way they walk in the hall, how they tell jokes. They're learning all sorts of things in school. It just might not be that they're learning the things that are on the test, right? So we have to be very careful about the way we're thinking about these abstractions. And it's so easy to make a mistake. So most of the questions that get asked at a level that produces a set of pathways, a hallway of hallways, instead of going into the territory. I'll give you another example. So you could say that you want to make a new Rolling Stones. You want to make a new Rolling Stones. You're a music producer. You want to do that. That was really successful. Let's do that again. Okay. So what's the Rolling Stones? Do you need a Mick Jagger? Is it Mick Jagger? Is it rock and roll? Is it the is it the era? Is it that time? Is it the audience? Is it the sex and drugs and opening up of culture? Is it the music industry? Is it the distribution? Which bit is the Rolling Stones? And what I want to bring in here is that what the Rolling Stones are is the relationship between all of those. Okay. And the Rolling Stones to us today is another thing. It's something legendary, right? They weren't legendary when they first started. So we want something legendary now. Already you're in a hallway right there. So what would you do if you wanted to think about that? How would you create the Rolling Stones? So what we have there is something that's happening in relationship through multiple contexts that's actually producing something that appears to be a thing, but it's not just that and nothing more. There's a lot more to that thing. So if you get caught perceiving the Rolling Stones as a thing, then the type of choices and decisions and strategies and goals and projects that get developed out of that understanding go in directions that are kind of crazy, actually. So I've placed that in a nice, safe box, right? Because none of us are music producers looking to, create the Rolling Stones. But I know that in my day, I am often in situations where I am trying to identify what's going on, and everything in my habituated, enculturated process of identification identifies the things. Okay, so if I'm having a conflict with my 14-year-old stepson, right, it comes out as, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not washing the dishes, you're eating too much sugar, you need to get your life together. Wait a minute, right? And if I back up from that and I take a look at what's going on, what I start to realize is that I'm incredibly frustrated because his well-being is my responsibility. So when I say, you're not eating well, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not helping enough, what I really mean is I haven't produced the possibility for this to happen in a way that's actually working for you. But I've reversed it. And that's an error of logical typing. Okay, so let's see, we have some questions, and I think I'd like to open up to some questions because we didn't get a lot of time for questions last time. But before we leave, I do actually want to introduce you to the next piece of this material. So we got to do both, okay, guys? All right. So if there are some questions, Peter, let's let them in.
All right, so start putting your questions in the chats and I'll call on you. We have one right now, and that's David. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hey, Nora. As I'm listening, I'm wondering about, there's a feeling that this logical typing error is somehow a mistake that we make that if we could avoid, things would get better. And actually, my experience isn't that kind of categorization of that thing itself kind of right? That the maturation that comes with the recognition that, oh, based on this typing error, I run into a contradiction that causes me some distress. And if I can actually be with that distress, I can feel somewhere in me the feeling tone of the distinction between what I thought and what I feel. And I can find ways to cope with the pain, the suffering, or eventually I can see that, oh, wait, there's another way of organizing this, in which I effectively, for me, it feels like I metabolize that. And then I'm operating in a different sphere. But at that sphere, new contradictions, new typing errors come in that I at first learned to cope with and bypass, and then eventually say, no, I must actually confront this one as well. So it seems, the one that I'm curious about, that sort of move of not making the typing error itself something bad that we're trying to completely do away with?
This is a very interesting question, and I'm going to take it in parts, okay? So first of all, I want to say yes. Yes, because what I am presenting here is the idea that you could parse these things out and you could actually crack the code of where the higher orders of abstraction are, so that you would know when you're on the map and when you're in the territory. Okay, but the trick is that you can't actually do that. So I don't want this to be that I just offered you a cupcake and now I'm taking it back. But what I do want to say is this is something that is very intellectual, except for that it's actually in your belly, which I think is what David is pointing to. That you will begin to, if you start working with it at an intellectual level, what kind of abstraction am I thinking in? You know, when you're working with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, for example, most of those are what I would describe as kind of errors of logical typing. Okay, you don't solve poverty because there's a lot of conditions underneath poverty that need to be addressed, right? You don't solve gender equality because that has to do with a lot of other processes that are in terms of, you know, history and culture and religion and all kinds of things. So there's a couple of different things going on here, and it's very confusing, which is why nobody wants to talk about this, right? There's a reason people don't go on podcasts and talk about logical typing, and this is it. It's because it's there and it's not there. You can know it and you cannot know it. There's a way to do it, and then it gets yanked out from under you. And on the one hand, I want to say, watch out. Be careful. Don't be working on the map when you're trying to work on the territory, because you will be disappointed, right? It's like eating menus. It's not very nutritious. On the other hand, what you're saying, David, is really true. So how do you start to know that? How do you feel your way into that? And that's why I started with music, right? I wanted you to feel the way in which your body, your memory, your self was listening to that music. And that's a very different way of being in sensual relationship than to look at the score. Nothing wrong with scores, okay? So the development of musical language is fantastic. It's an incredible process. And if you're a genius, you can really hear that music in your head, but you're still not experiencing it in your body with other people in a space where the sound is coming off the walls and into yourself, right? It's your memories, it's your history, it's the way that your eyes happen to move and what you happen to glance at while you're listening to the music. So it's a very different order of sense making. And the thing that's important about this is this idea of going to the notion of we need to fix something. And that is almost always going to be trouble. Unless you're fixing the radio or, you know, something more mechanical or physical, the fixing of living systems as an idea is always going to be an issue. And so this is, I mean, in a way, this is why I do warm data. Okay, because it's down in this other place where there's all kinds of information that's actually creating the living tissue of sense making. where then you would say, oh yeah, the Rolling Stones, that's rock and roll. We know the category. We know the generation that was into it. We know how much money a ticket costs. We know who Mick Jagger is. We can find lots of hold on to-able bits of data. But what you can't know is the thrill of the Rolling Stones coming into the world with a new expression of what it felt like to be alive, and how that was part of the generation, and how that has carried on, and what that means to new generations. When my 14-year-old kid is in the kitchen singing "Wild, Wild Horses," right? What's he hearing? What's that relationship? So when we're talking about sense making, this logical typing thing is important. And it's both of those things. I see a question that says, so logical typing is disembodied. Yes, no. That's the thing, right? So you have the table of contents of a book. And then there's the book. And then there's the way that that book resonated with you or didn't resonate with you. What you learned from that book has to do more with what you had already with you and what it could latch onto, right? So there are these different levels. And what I'm really asking you to do is actually not try to find the right one or the wrong one, but just to pay attention. Just to start developing a kind of attention to what kind of abstraction level is this thing in? Sometimes we ask the question in the general semantics realm of what's going on? What's going on? And that's an interesting question, because you can say, what's actually going on? What's going on? And that's real. What's going on, right? I'm in my studio here, and the dog's at my feet, and the second I start to tell you what's going on, I've actually culled pieces of that, developed it into language, edited it, produced it into ways of describing that are already predetermined as cultural established processes of description. All right, so that's that. And then there's the fact that I'm just described my describing. That's another level of abstraction. And describing the describing. Do you see? So we just have to watch out. We have to watch out where that is. Because sometimes it's really important for us to be in that abstraction. And other times you really won't get where you're trying to go if the thing that you're trying to change is in the abstract. It's like trying to put lipstick on your reflection in the mirror. It's not you, but it looks like you, but it's an abstraction. And if you put the lipstick there and then go out in the world, the lipstick's on the map, not the territory, right? So it matters. It matters a great deal. Let's see if we have more questions.
Yeah, I think we have either questions or statements. Deborah, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, I think you answered it, Nora, but I'm wondering, because you said, I asked, so is logical typing disembodied? And you said yes and no. So when might it be embodied? What would that look like?
You know, the thing is that when we were playing with the music last time, right? So at that moment, in the difference between the image of the score and the feeling of the music in your body, that understanding of logical typing, if you want to call it that, was an embodied understanding. So then if I say, is the score a disembodied description? I can't actually say that, because I could hold that score. I can see that score and I can feel how it makes me feel, which is what David was trying to say. I feel a difference, but I feel it. So it is embodied. It's just a different feeling. Tricky. It's very tricky. And this is why no one plays with this. Let's see. What else you got?
Peter Jones had a thought. I don't know if you want to share it with us, Peter.
It was really about whether in abstracting, we're relating to metaphors. So there is some embodiment from the metaphors, but we may not be aware of the metaphors that we're using. We use embodied language all constantly to describe things, and yet I know that I'm not always in touch with the experience that's coming from. When I step back and I think about it, and I go meta with that with my understanding of where it's coming from, I can get in touch with it. But in conversation, where we're really trying to influence each other with ideas and thoughts that are pertinent to a conversation, and there's often, I mean, just even in this discussion, there's, we're learning, but we're also influencing each other. And so with respect to the use of abstraction to make a difference, to suggest a change, isn't there a way that we're constantly using metaphors as a way to communicate and to describe, our own, so that they become real for each other? We're embodying them with metaphors. I guess that's are we embodying them with metaphors? That's the question.
I have no idea how we could possibly not. I mean, of course we have to. How else could we do? Right? It's not as though, right? I absolutely no idea. I'm reflecting because I got this fantastic note from a very good friend of mine, Stephen Nakmanovich, who's a violin player and improvisation expert. And I told you that I have this big black dog sitting at my feet, and my big black dog at my feet is named Blake, and he's named for William Blake. And I got a message from Stephen yesterday, and Stephen said, "Aren't you glad that you named your dog Blake and not Complexity?" And I think that in some way that's the best response I could possibly give you to your question, is that of course there are metaphors, and of course those metaphors are an abstraction, but to what? And that's where we have to be a little bit careful, right? Because so many of the metaphors, even in our language, are built on Newtonian physics. And we say things like,
falling into place. I mean, we lining things up. I mean, everything that describes a movement or an intention almost comes from our bodies. And yet, I guess the question is I'm interested in our intentionality and what we're when we use the wrong types in the wrong categories to try to accomplish good ends. And all the time, it becomes problematic. We use the only metaphors that we have available to us, it seems, which are the ones inherent in our own biases and that we tune to our culture. And so we can do better than that, I guess. I'm trying to get to something in what you're saying that will help me get past this kind of insufficiency of my own metaphorical language to make those differences.
Quite. I think probably one of the most important things you just said is that we align our metaphors to our cultural biases. And so that's where you're going to get all kinds of mechanistic metaphors that then get placed on top of living system issues. And this is where my dad used to always do this thing where he would say, watch out for these terminologies that come from Newtonian physics, that it's perfectly okay to get in the car in the morning and pat it on the dashboard and say, good morning, old gal, come on, we got a road ahead of us. Let's, get warmed up and get ready for the day. But it's another thing altogether when you start to perceive your family with the same kind of mechanistic functionality or dysfunctionality, okay, listen to those words, that you would see your car engine. Okay, somehow my family is dysfunctional is a kind of languaging that is going to tie us into this idea that we could fix the parts. If I could just fix my child's behavior, then the operative process of the family would work better. But the family is not a mechanistic system. And the behavior of the child is a reflection of all kinds of communication in the family across generations back and into the culture and into the technology and so on and so forth. So if you try to fix it at the level of the problem, more than likely you're at the wrong level. So, but this is exactly how almost all of our process of analysis and strategic solutioning looks. We ask the question, right? What's the problem? Identify it, define it. In the strictest, most deep, articulated, specialized language you can, get really, really tight in on that definition, as tight as possible, so that you can get a really good solution. And that solution is going to be over here somewhere, right? But it's like a line to get there. And if we could just fix that problem, then we could get to the solution. And we could have a strategy. We could take, 5 steps to get there and know that we're making progress. But most of the time, this thing right here, this problem is not the problem. It's a consequence. It's a consequence of all kinds of conditions that have come in. There's history, and there's economy, and there's identity, and there's culture, and there's all sorts of things. Family, technology, whatever it is that's produced this issue. And this issue, if you try to solve it with a direct corrective, you're going to already be in a logical typing conundrum. So we try to solve the consequences, and this is very sort of normal stuff, right? We talk all the time about, oh yeah, well, I took this pill and it made my symptoms go away, but I'm still sick. So we're used to even addressing this, and yet it's still so perniciously seductive that you could try to grab it and make the Rolling Stones fix the problem. So I think that for me, one of the real issues here is to get down into the warm data. This is why I do warm data, basically, because I'm trying to figure out what are the relational informational processes that are informing through all these different, the conditions around the thing we're trying to address. Ultimately, for the record, I think we need both. Just so you know, I'm not totally, on high on my own Kool-Aid here, but we need both. But I think it's important to have this step of just paying attention to what in our perception, in our sense making, is actually producing a perpetuation of the same problems? And that's the real question. How can we start to address the issues we're within in ways that don't perpetuate the same issues? Yeah. More questions?
Yeah, we have a bunch. I think we're scheduled 50 minutes at the end of the hour, so there's about 30 minutes left. Do you want to finish the rest of the portion off that you said you had, or do you want to keep
I
fielding?
do. Is it
Okay.
okay with you if we do that and come back to the questions, everybody? Okay. All right, so I'm going to screen share again. And the thing that I'm going to go into here is a piece from my dad. And it's a piece that I really love. So I'm going to share it with you. And it's helped me a great deal. That's really why I want to share it. So this is a quote out of Steps to an Ecology of Mind. And in this quote, hold up. In this quote, my father is introducing this notion of things being trans-contextual. Before you read it, let me just read it to you, and then we'll work on it together, because my dad's writing is kind of difficult. Yeah. For those of you who have read any Bateson, that was a joke. So he says, this is from whatever, 1960 something or other, published in 1972. He says, let me coin the word trans-contextual as a general term for this genus of syndromes. He's talking about double binds. It seems that both those whose life is enriched by trans-contextual gifts and those who are impoverished by trans-contextual confusions are alike in one respect. For them, there is always or often a double take, a falling leaf, the greeting of a friend, or a primrose by the river's brim is not just that and nothing more. Exogenous experience may be framed in the context of a dream, and internal thought may be projected into the context of the external world, and so on. For all this, we seek a partial explanation in learning and experience. Okay. So I'm going to leave this up here for a second. All right. So for me, trans-contextual was not just a replacement for transdisciplinary or intersector or any of those ways in which we talk about bringing in lots of perspectives. Okay, it's not just another way to talk about something being hybridized. What it is a recognition that no matter what it is you're looking at in a living system, a complex system, that it's, let's go to this piece right here. It is not just that and nothing more. It's not just that and nothing more. So whether we're talking about education, it's not just that and nothing more. It's also family and culture and history and the ideas of future and success and identity. Whether we're talking about health, it's not just that and nothing more. As we learned from the pandemic, health is political, health is cultural, health is how you look at somebody who does or doesn't have a mask on right now. Health is an ecology of ideas. It's not just health and nothing more. So if you look at his examples here, he talks about a falling leaf or the greeting of a friend or a primrose by the river's brim. So a falling leaf, you know, he's chosen things here that are so atomized in our experience that you could see a falling leaf and just think it's a falling leaf. You could not even see the falling leaf. The falling leaf could be the melancholy of fall, of autumn coming. A falling leaf could be representative of someone that you know who's recently passed away. The falling leaf could be a signature of your own feeling of inadequacy. A falling leaf could be a release. It could be freedom. It could be the beginning of new possibilities. The falling leaf could mean there's a bird in the tree. It could be that it's a windy day and that wind is bringing with it whatever, change. The greeting of a friend could be the simple, hey, how you doing? But what if that friend hadn't said, hey, how you doing for 2 years and this was the first time they said it? What if that, hey, how you doing, had a different tone in it than they had ever used with you before? And you knew that it was sweet, but it was saccharine. And so it wasn't sweet at all. What if every other time you saw that friend, they rushed to you and wrapped their arms around you? And today they stood across the street and said, hey, how you doing? It's not just that and nothing more. So when I go to the bus stop in Sweden and I expect from my own cultural set of experiences that if you see someone at the bus stop and it's just the two of you, that you should say something. You should say, hello, how are you? Hi, nice day. A lot of rain we're having, you know, whatever, something. Or do you know what time the bus is supposed to be here? But you say something, you smile, you do something, right? But not here. And what I'm learning is not to do that and not to be offended by someone else doing that. But that means that greeting is not just that and nothing more. The lack of that greeting here is a sign of respect. It's a communication of respect. The greeting I don't give is a communication of respect. How about that? So whatever it is you see on the script, whatever it is that's in black and white, it's not just that and nothing more. And this is that same business of being careful where we are paying attention, where we're sense making. So when I think about transcontextual and as a description, how am I transcontextual? How are you transcontextual? I am a mom, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a 52-year-old American in Sweden. I'm an ex-punk rocker. I am 40 trillion organisms. I am the keeper of this big black dog named Blake. I am a daughter. I am all these different contexts come together. And when you and I are in relationship, do I allow you to be transcontextual? Do I give you that? And how might I pay attention? So that if you say one word that makes me think, oh, that person is a neoliberal capitalist, that I might pause for a second and think, I wonder what else is in their transcontextual soup. Who else are they? What else is there? Maybe they're not just that and nothing more. So how to bring that deeper territorial process of who you are. Because you know what? I actually don't know who I am from one day to the next. I have no idea how you could know. So how do I give that kind of love and respect of allowing that complexity, that transcontextual process to be so in a community, in a society, in a human being, in a family, in my dog Blake, and try to, when I am in participation with some kind of project there, to be attentive to those processes and not get caught in the consequences that appear to be the thing. That's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to bring in this notion of transcontextual. Okay, so now we can keep asking questions and having dialogue if you want.
All right, we got some good questions. Christian just asked a question, so we'll take him in.
Good morning. My question.
Oh, Kristen, I see your question. Go ahead, you say it so that it's, yeah.
How can the notion of transcontextual confusion inform our approach to understanding or treating mental illnesses where it seems like transcontextual confusion plays an important role in creating the symptoms of paranoia, mania, OCD, and so on? And I'm just curious if you've uncovered certain novel insights from this framework of transcontextuality that's informed your understanding of these or practical applications to treatments.
Yeah. The quick answer is yeah. And this question is so dear to my heart. So I want to tell you a little story that goes along with it. So I've been developing this thing that you may or may not have heard of called a warm data lab. And the warm data lab is a transcontextual process to work with groups. The idea is that warm data is transcontextual information. That's the short version. So I was traveling and I got invited to go to a place to do a warm data lab with a group of people. And I knew they had something to do with mental health. And I had been working with therapists and groups along the way that were dealing with mental health. So, I wasn't in any way surprised, but I had had several lab sessions lined up in a row, and I just showed up. I didn't actually have all the information I should have had. Well, as it turned out, they didn't have all the information they should have had either. And we started having this warm data lab, and I introduced it, and I thought I was talking to actually a group of activist therapists, people who were trying to work more with the deeper conditions than the symptoms, right? Those are usually the sort of therapists that I do trainings and things with. So I thought that's who they were. I made an assumption. And we got an hour or so into the lab, and then I noticed that something was different, but I didn't know what it was. And at the end of the lab, I do what I always do, which was to ask for, reflections and noticings and what had come up. And the first person who raised her hand said, "We got lost in the warm data. The reason we have the diagnoses we have is because we got confused. Our lives were in relationship to each other, and the warm data we were within confused us. And we've been drowning in the warm data." And she said, "This is the first time anyone's come to meet us where we are." And so at that moment, I realized that the situation that I was in was not the one that I thought. And it turned out that the room was actually a room of 36 people with very severe diagnoses. And I have no idea to this day how that happened, because it should never have happened. I did not have the qualifications to be in that room. They had no idea that I didn't know. I mean, whatever happened there, it was a wild mistake, but it was a gift. Because what I learned in that moment was that in working with the warm data, there was the possibility for a whole different kind of response to trauma, response to all the things that you are pointing to here, these questions around a mental illness, because they are very easily described in terms of linear causation. And the experience can be described as inside the person. And in the warm data work, what we're starting, we have a research team working on exactly this question, Christian, because it's so fascinating. And what we're starting to really see is the way that the trauma, instead of it living inside the individual as an event, can start to be perceived in the relationship between the conditions in their of the transcontextual life they live. Is this making sense to you? So that when that happens, there's an enormous lift. There's an enormous lift of being able to actually perceive themselves in the world in another way. I hope that that was coherent. There's several years of research in what I just said. So, and we haven't published anything on it yet because we're not ready, but if you're interested, feel free to contact me.
Do you have a follow-up, Christian? And maybe you would like to share that quote, that delicious quote you put in the chats.
Yeah, well, that was a very coherent and great response, and I think I will contact you, so thank you. The quote was, I was reminded of it when you said that the patients, well, how you phrased it was as they were drowning in the warm data, and it reminded me of the quote, I think.
Yeah.
I think this comes from Joseph Campbell, the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Cool. Cristiano, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. The question is, seems that warm data doesn't help or could be demystified the question like how to fix this problem. So I was wondering, warm data address and help supports other kind of questions, or is a way to refine questions? So it works the opposite way.
Yeah. There's a lot happening that we don't have conscious, verbal, cultural description of in any circumstance, right? Whether it's just that you meet someone or that you're trying to deal with climate change, or, you know, on either a very personal level or totally global projects. There are undercurrents of ways in which these processes are crossing into each other. So those get very confused. So one example is when President Macron created a gas tax. And his gas tax was hailed as the first real policy change toward sustainable development. And that was an error of logical typing because he didn't actually pay attention to the underlying conditions. So he asked the wrong question. The question was not how to make people use less gas by making them pay more. That was the wrong question. But it seemed like the right question because he was looking at carbon in the atmosphere and trying to manipulate that process. But then the yellow vests came out and they formed this movement and said, but we have to use the gas to get to work. So this thing that you did showed us in the meta that you have no clue what's going on in the working class, that you don't care and you don't know. And the insult of that went down into the culture, and it started to spread. And it spread into other groups, and it became a religious conflict, and it became a racial conflict, and it went in all different directions because he started with a question that was actually not having enough context in it, or contexts. So what I would say there is that the warm data, if he had done some warm data, or worked probably with a lot of other possibilities, ask a very different question. I mean, that would have had a very different set of messaging. They would have, my connection is unstable. I just got a notification. A very different set of messaging. I'm not saying that would have been the solution, but in answer to your question, I think what we're talking about here is really about this, that my friend Scott calls it the step zero. It's the step zero. Have we sense made? Have we spent a little time learning how to be in communication around the interdependency of these contexts before we came up with a project? Do we have a language we can share? Can we begin to understand together from that place and then develop a problem, a project?
Thank you.
Cool. Davita, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, how do we avoid being overwhelmed when trying to grasp those multiple contexts? Because, I mean, I don't know if there's a way to draw a line, and it's different every time, right? But when we try to solve a problem, not fix, solve a problem, it's never linear. We can always open up to another context and another relations and everything. But at some point, we do want to take action. So how do we avoid this feeling of everything is connected? How do we avoid being overwhelmed when trying to explore all of those relations?
I mean, I would say you do it all day, every day. And, you know, when you walk across the room, you are actually, you are balancing, you've got language, you've got light, you've got texture, you've got a reason to go across the room, and you pick up one foot and you put it in front of the next and you figure out how to do it. There's a moment when you tell someone that you love them. How do you know to do that? Because if you get it wrong, it's a problem. So what are you sensing? What are you looking at? What are you paying attention to? And I actually think that the thing is about getting used to it. And if you just start to practice, you won't be overwhelmed. It isn't like it just goes on and on and on and on forever. Okay, there is that moment when you have to just do the thing, right? So one of the examples that I use with that is that if you happen to be an EMT and you show up at the scene and there's somebody overdosing, you have to give them an injection. Okay, you can't sit around and think about the context of the context of the context in which the culture and the economy all produced this issue. You don't have time to sit there and like create tomes of warm data documents. You have to just respond. But if you have an approach that's actually inclusive of the habit of looking in that way, the entire experience and communication physically, in terms of the resonance of your voice, in terms of the other EMTs, the way in which that EMT sees that person is not as a hindrance to society or a lost soul or it's a someone who is in the complexity of this world and is caught. And the warmth of their touch, the way that they make eye contact when that person opens their eyes, the way that they speak to the other EMTs about getting this person in the ambulance, everything is different. Even if the action is exactly the same. So it has to do mostly with a kind of humility and a warmth. I mean, that's why we call it warm data, because it's warm. When you start to perceive other people in that way and situations in that way, you're looking at a very different world. Does that make sense? Davida? I think she's frozen. Or maybe I'm frozen. I don't know.
We're all frozen sometimes. I think that is Davida bounced. Yes, I think she left the Zoom room. One more question, Nora?
Yeah, one more question.
All right. How about Jason? You just put a question in right now.
Hello. So yeah, I just asked, could we say that this is about constantly expanding our awareness of the relationships between everything? Feels like the most simple way that I could drill it down.
Yeah. Okay, well, since you asked such a simple question, I have to give you an answer that's totally all over the place, okay? You know about Procrustes? So Procrustes is in Greek mythology. Procrustes is the guy whose job it was to guard Athens, okay? And he had, it's so weird, but this is the story, okay? He had this iron bed. And Procrustes, before anybody could go into Athens, Procrustes put them on the iron bed. And if they were too short, he stretched them. And if they were too long or too wide or too this or too that, he trimmed them and tucked them and did all manner of violence to them to get them to fit. Okay? So I would say that what I am hoping for is that in our perception of each other and the world that we are living in, the changes, the system changes, the work that we're doing, that we might be able to be a little less Procrustean, of trying to fit life into our idea of how to change things, trying to fit people, trying to fit families, trying to fit societies or economies into existing sets of ideas of how to make change. So yes, we are expanding our awareness of the relationships and recognizing that those relationships themselves are full of life. They're, you know, so often when you draw out a system or a complexity map, what you have between the parts are these lines or arrows. But what we have between us is not a line or an arrow. I don't have one single relationship in my life or body that looks like an arrow, feels like an arrow, walks, talks, smells, or senses like an arrow or a line. Every relational process is completely full of all kinds of contextual information. So what's there? That's, I guess, kind of that's what we're doing. So before you leave, I want to tell you what we're going to do next time. Okay. So this time we've kind of been introduced to transcontextual description. And last time we did some logical typing. And next time, what I would like to do is play with a theory called the double bind, and actually bring these two notions together around how we get double binded and how we get undouble binded. And this is a question of how we get stuck and how we get unstuck. but it's not a mechanistic question. Obviously, we're going deep into the relational processes there. Yeah. So thank you very much. Is there any more comment, question, anything?
There's a bunch of questions and comments in the chat. Maybe I can save it for you and send it your way so you can process it. But we are reached our time, so we might as well close here. Nora, any concluding thoughts or any final words you'd like to leave us with?
I guess the only thing that I would like to say is that as per our conversation today, I know that a lot of us are active in the internet world and in social media and commentary and things like that. And that in this moment in particular, that landscape of communication is rife with people underestimating each other and not giving each other the benefit of their complexity. And I just want to bring some warmth to you as you are in communication with other people. And I'm deeply concerned actually about where all the hurt is going that's being generated in that sphere. So as we go today, I just want to say, don't be procrustes on the internet. And yeah, it's see what warmth we can bring.
Beautiful. So on that note, we'll close out. Nora, once again, thank you for coming to Stoa, being a sense maker in residence. We're looking forward to next week. Rachel will be here again, emceeing it. To close out on a few announcements, we have a bunch of events today, or a bunch meaning two more. We got Summoning the Unseen, Poetry and Meditation to Conjure Deep Support and Inspiration with Brooke Monera. And that's at, what time is that? I don't know. I think that's 2 p.m. Eastern time. So that's going to be a fun event. And then we got Noam Chomsky coming at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. I think like 400 people RSVP to that. So I'm a little nervous. So don't go to that one. We have too much people coming. And we have a bunch of other events coming. We have about 20 this week, Patreon, and then Substack. You can check it out there. So that being said, everyone, thanks for coming to the Stoa today.
Thanks a lot. See you next Monday.
Or Thursday. I think you're going to be here Thursday.
Thursday.
For high pitch.
And Monday.